The story begins with a 9-year-old boy named Temujin who was given the responsibility of choosing his future wife from a group of girls. His father instructed him to select a girl who was fair-skinned, healthy, had a large face, and small eyes. However, the most important criterion was that the girl must have strong and agile legs, because his father believed that only a girl with strong legs could double her husband's happiness. Soon, Temujin found a girl he liked and took her to his father. However, his father was disappointed because he had hoped that Temujin would choose a girl from their enemy tribe, the Merkit, to turn their long-standing enmity into friendship. But Temujin had fallen in love with a girl from the smallest tribe, which complicated matters. Despite this, Temujin was happy to have found his bride. Before leaving, he gifted the girl a piece of a crow's bone and promised to return and marry her in 5 years. On his way back with his father and their companions, they encountered a fierce storm, forcing them to take shelter in a cave. The Mongols believed that storms were a sign of the god's anger. After the storm passed, they continued their journey, but soon faced another dangerous tribe. According to Mongol law, spilling blood near water was forbidden. Both sides stood alert, watching each other cautiously, but no one made the first move. After some time, a man from the opposing tribe approached with a bowl of milk, extending a hand of peace. Temujin's father reciprocated by sending back a cup of wine and a plate of dried meat. However, his men were suspicious and insisted that a slave should taste the milk first. But Temujin's father refused and, showing his trust, drank the entire bowl in one go. Unbeknownst to him, the rival tribe was deceitful. Shortly after, as they traveled a little further, Temujin's father suddenly collapsed. Poison had spread through his body, and he died on the spot. Seeing this, a man named Elton laughed instead of mourning. Enraged, 9-year-old Temujin lashed out at him with his whip. However, with his father's death, Elton soon rebelled and declared himself the new leader of the tribe. Temujin's mother tried to unite the people under her leadership but failed. She warned Elton that one day, Temujin would grow up to become the next Khan and take revenge for this betrayal. Among the Mongols, all tribal rulers were called Khan, and this title had no connection to the Muslim community. Hearing her words, Elton decided to kill Temujin before he could grow up. However, according to the laws, killing a child smaller than a cartwheel was considered a sin. Since Temujin was just a little shorter than the wheel, he was spared this time. But Elton warned that he would return in a few months to finish the job. Fearing for his life, Temujin set out on a treacherous journey to the sacred mountains to seek divine protection. However, the freezing cold proved too harsh, and he collapsed unconscious on the icy ground. But then fate intervened. A boy appeared and saved him. The two soon became friends, and after exchanging words, they performed a ritual by sacrificing a few drops of their blood, making them blood brothers. Both boys shared a dream to rule the entire land and later conquer other nations. However, Temujin had no idea that his newfound brother, Jamuksa, would one day become his biggest rival. A few days later, Elton's men captured Temujin and brought him back to the tribe. However, due to malnutrition, he was still not as tall as a cartwheel. Furious, Elton ordered his men to feed Temujin meat and fish to make him stronger. He warned that by the time he returned, Temujin had better be as tall as the wheel. Temujin remained silent, but the seeds of vengeance had already begun to grow in his heart. After Elton left, a heavy rainstorm hit, forcing all the guards to take shelter in their tents. Temujin seized the opportunity and escaped, running relentlessly despite being bound in chains, heading straight for the sacred mountain. There, he bowed his head and sincerely prayed to the gods for freedom. Moments later, a wolf appeared. Its sharp eyes seemed to pierce into Temujin's soul, but he showed no fear. By divine intervention, he suddenly broke free from his chains. Years passed, and Temujin grew stronger. However, Elton was still determined to kill him. Meanwhile, Elton's rule had turned brutal, and his tribe was suffering under his tyranny. Temujin vowed to reclaim his tribe, as it was rightfully his. But before that, he had to fulfill his promise to marry his bride, Berti. When Temujin finally reached Berti, he had neither a home nor wealth. Yet, Berti did not reject him, and happily agreed to marry him. Though Temujin was now a formidable warrior, he still felt shy around Berta. After a long journey, he introduced her to his mother, who gifted Berta the family's ancestral necklace. In return, Temujin presented her with a valuable fur coat from the dowry chest. Their wedding was complete, and just as they were about to enter their chambers, warriors from the Merkit tribe stormed in. The Merkit leader claimed that Berthe belonged to them, as years ago Temujin's mother had been taken from the Merkit tribe. Now they sought revenge by taking Temujin's wife. Outnumbered, Temujin and Berthe decided to flee. However, Temujin was struck by an arrow. To save her husband, Berthe made a heartbreaking decision. She whipped his horse, forcing it to run home with the injured Temujin while she surrendered to the Merkit warriors. She was taken away and became the wife of their leader. Determined to rescue Berthe, Temujin sought help from his blood brother, Jamuka. He offered Jamuka the valuable fur coat, his last remaining possession, in exchange for his aid. However, Mongol law dictated that they did not fight wars over women, so Jamuka was reluctant. He told Temujin that he could always find another wife, but Temujin was resolute. After much persuasion, Jamuka finally agreed to help, but said they would need time to prepare, as he had only recently become a tribal leader and lacked a strong army. Temujin had no choice but to wait. Months later, Temujin and Jamuka gathered their forces and rode out to attack the Merkit tribe. As they approached the rocky hills, an eerie silence filled the air, and Jamuka sensed danger. His instincts were right. Hundreds of Merkit warriors lay in ambush behind the rocks. Suddenly, they launched a fierce attack. The Merkit warriors wore skull masks and fought viciously. However, Jamuka's forces were strong too. Both sides clashed in a brutal battle. Jamuka drew his sword and began cutting down his enemies one by one. Seizing the opportunity, Temujin infiltrated the Merkit camp to find Berthe. But when he finally saw her, he was devastated. She was pregnant. There was no way to determine whether the child was his or the Merkit leader's. Despite this, Temujin chose to accept Berthe as his wife. Overcome with emotion, Berthe embraced him. That evening, as they celebrated their victory, Jamuka offered Temujin a position as his general. However, Temujin declined. He had bigger ambitions. When it came time to divide the spoils of war, Jamuka kept most of the treasure for himself, leaving only a few items for Temujin. Yet, instead of keeping them, Temujin distributed everything among his soldiers who had fought alongside him. With this selfless act, he won their loyalty. This was just the beginning of his rise to power. Temujin would one day become Genghis Khan, the greatest conqueror the world had ever known. He got angry and pulled out his knife to attack, but at that moment, Jamuka stopped him and told him to stay calm. Although Jamuka was quite upset with Temujin's behavior, he still let him go. And with this, the enmity between the two brothers began. Months passed, and one day, Jamuka's younger brother entered Temujin's camp, intending to take revenge. He had come to herd Temujin's war horses, but suddenly, Temujin's soldiers shot arrows at him, killing him on the spot. When the soldier realized the grave mistake he had made, he immediately lay at Temujin's feet and said he would place his own head at Jamuka's feet to maintain peace between the two tribes. Now, Temujin was confused about what to do. His soldier had not done it intentionally. He was simply performing his duty. His wife reminded him that he had always worked for his people. But if he handed over his soldier to Jamuka, would his people still respect him? Hearing this, Temujin had a realization. Meanwhile, when Altan learned of Jamuka's brother's death, he added fuel to the fire by provoking Jamuka. Now, Jamuka was filled with rage and swore to avenge his brother's death. Soon, Altan joined forces with Jamuka and declared war against Temujin. For Temujin, protecting his people was now his top priority. So, he ordered the children, women, and elderly to move to a safe place. Before parting ways, Temujin's wife gave him a keepsake and prayed for his safe return. Now, Temujin's army stood against an enemy force 20 times larger, but despite this, none of his warriors abandoned him. At Jamuka's signal, a fierce battle began. The enemy attacked Temujin's army with full force, but they stood their ground and fought bravely. However, one by one, his brothers-in-arms fell before his eyes. This made Temujin's blood boil, but soon, the enemy surrounded him from all sides. This was the first and last defeat of his life. However, remembering their old brotherhood, Jamuka spared Temujin's life and instead sold him as a slave to a merchant. As a result, Temujin became a slave and was taken to the Xia dynasty. As soon as they crossed the border, the general of that region recognized Temujin and decided to buy him. A Buddhist monk advised him not to purchase Temujin as a slave, as he was no ordinary man. but the general ignored the monk's warning and bought Temujin for just 5 coins. However, instead of killing him, he imprisoned Temujin in a dog cage and began torturing him slowly. The general had no idea that this mistake would eventually lead to the destruction of his entire kingdom. The truth was that this slave was destined to build the largest empire in history. Temujin was kept in the cage like an animal, and the people of the royal palace mocked him. They didn't even feed him properly. Even the actual dogs in the kingdom ate better than he did. But Temujin remained calm and observed everything around him carefully with his small, sharp eyes. One day, a priest who had been watching all of this came to Temujin, apologized, and requested that when Temujin attacked this kingdom in the future, he should spare the temples. The priest knew what was coming. Temujin didn't say anything, but handed him the keepsake given by his wife and asked him to deliver it to her. To fulfill his religious duty, the priest embarked on a long journey across the scorching desert. But he couldn't bear the extreme heat and died just short of his destination. At that moment, Borte, Temujin's wife, suddenly felt something and set out to find her husband along with their child. On the way, she found the priest's lifeless body, still holding the keepsake she had given to Temujin. She realized that Temujin was still alive. She stopped a caravan and traveled with it toward the Shia dynasty. Finally, after many years, Borte was reunited with her husband. By then, Temujin had become nothing but skin and bones due to starvation, and his skin had become rough like tree bark from exposure to the sun and wind. Seeing him in that state, Borte's eyes filled with tears, but there was no time to cry. As soon as night fell, she bribed the guards with silver coins and secured Temujin's release. Finally, he returned to his homeland. Years of war in Mongolia had turned everything into barren land. Once again, Temujin went to the sacred mountain to pray to the gods for divine power. At that moment, the same wolf appeared before him that he had encountered 10 years earlier. Temujin swore before the wolf to build the greatest empire in the world. And in the following years, he fulfilled that dream. Great warriors from different places joined him, and soon he had an army of 10,000 soldiers. He had now become the biggest threat to Jamuka. Although Jamuka's army was twice the size of Temujin's, and they were prepared to attack near the Jammu River, Temujin had no fear. He was confident that the gods were with him, and that no one could defeat him. Suddenly, Temujin ordered his entire army to retreat. Seeing this, Jamuka's soldiers chased after them and fell into Temujin's trap. At that moment, Temujin's archers emerged and unleashed a storm of arrows upon Jamuka's army. Within just 15 minutes, one of Jamuka's battalions was wiped out. Enraged, Jamuka ordered his soldiers to launch a direct attack, and they charged like a powerful wave against Temujin's forces. But suddenly, 2 dark clouds collided in the sky. Temujin realized that the gods were on his side. As his army advanced, the clouds thickened and a fierce storm broke out. Seeing the terrifying storm, Jamuka's army panicked and scattered. At that moment, only one warrior stood firm on the battlefield, Temujin. As soon as he drew his sword, its sharp gleam made his soldiers feel as if the gods themselves had come to protect them. Filled with renewed energy, they charged toward their enemies and crushed them. In the end, Temujin emerged victorious in this war and became the ruler of the Mongol Empire. According to the law, all enemy soldiers and slaves were to be executed after the war to establish the dominance of the victor. However, Temujin did not follow this custom. Instead, he spared their lives and included them in his army. Because of his generosity and new laws, he won the hearts of the people. Finally, when he returned to his camp, he encountered Jamuka. Temujin never saw Jamuka as his enemy, so he decided to set him free. In 1206, when Temujin was 44 years old, he united the entire Mongol Empire. Then, he led his army toward the Xia dynasty to attack. However, he remembered the promise he had made to the priest years ago and spared the temples from destruction. Afterward, he built an army of 300,000 soldiers and launched attacks on neighboring countries, eventually establishing the largest empire the world had ever seen. This was the story of the Mongol Emperor Temujin, also known as Genghis Khan. If you like